To our Cocoa Futures three-part webinar series, Innovation, Impact, and Indulgence in Chocolate's Next Era, hosted by Branch Food and Business Location Switzerland. This session is part of a new webinar series focused on the future of cocoa and chocolate, bringing together leaders in innovation, impact, and indulgence to discuss where the industry is headed next. Across the series, we'll be exploring topics such as sustainable cocoa sourcing, advances in fermentation and flavor development, emerging consumer preferences, and cutting-edge technologies shaping production and supply chains. Today's conversation sets the stage broadly, talking about how innovation and sustainability are shaping chocolate's next era, with future sessions, which will deep dive into cocoa science technology, new business models driving transparency and traceability, and investor perspectives on supporting the next wave of change. By way of introduction, my name is Lauren Abda, and I'm the founder of Branch Food, a launchpad for food innovation and one of the largest networks of food industry stakeholders in North America. At Branch Food, we connect every corner of the food ecosystem by hosting educational and networking events that help innovators bring new products, technologies, and services to market. We provide consulting support for the largest corporations in the world, leading to food industry change and adaptation as corporations seek sustainable growth, new revenue streams, and reduced innovation risk. And lastly, the third part of our work is investing. Branch Venture Group, our angel investment network, funds early-stage food businesses, including consumer product brands, food tech companies, as well as ag tech companies. So to date, we've partnered with more than 950 businesses, invested $4.5 million in early-stage food ventures, and hosted over 250 events. You can learn more about our work at branchfood.com and branchventuregroup.com, or reach out to me directly at lauren@branchfood. I'm also thrilled to welcome and recognize our partners at Business Location Switzerland. BLS is a national initiative bringing together Switzerland's global enterprise, the Swiss business hubs worldwide, and regional promotion agencies across Switzerland that are working to support and advance innovation and economic development within the region and within the country. Together, these organizations help international companies explore and establish a presence in Switzerland by providing market insights, regulatory guidance, and introductions to universities, research institutes, incubators, and industry networks. If you're interested in learning more about how Switzerland can support your company's growth and innovation, please don't hesitate to connect with the BLS team or reach out to me. I'm more than happy to introduce you to any of them. Finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Elizabeth Crawford, who is the senior editor of Food Navigator USA. Elizabeth brings more than 2 decades of experience covering the food, supplement, and healthcare industries, reporting on everything from investment and innovation to ingredients, regulatory developments, labeling, and emerging trends. She is also the host of Food Navigator's Soup to Nuts podcast, a go-to resource for understanding what's next in food and beverage. As a reminder, for the call today, this webinar contains proprietary and confidential business information. Any references, quotes, or publications based on the content shared today must receive prior written approval by the webinar organizers, and any unauthorized use, reproduction, or publication is not prohibited. If you have any questions about that, please reach out to me again, lauren@branchfood.com. So Elizabeth, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for doing this, coming to us from the field, and over to you to start the webinar.
Amazing. Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for hosting today's event and bringing us all together. As Lauren noted, over the next hour, we will explore everything from precision fermentation to alternative fats to flavor enhancements, personalization, and even AI-assisted formulation. These aren't just buzzwords. They're also tools and ideas that are reshaping how chocolate is made, sourced, and experienced. So as I think we all know, but we'll talk about more today, right? The chocolate industry is under real pressure. There's climate change, price volatility, evolving consumer expectations, all of which are forcing the category to adapt. But those challenges are also opening doors, and some of the most exciting breakthroughs that we've seen in decades are coming forward as a result. And in this session, you'll hear how stakeholders across the value chain are leveraging science and creativity to build that next generation of chocolate products that not only deliver indulgence, but also resilience, sustainability, and new possibilities for the future. To help us unpack the challenges facing the industry and explore solutions, I am honored to be joined by a very esteemed panel, including Marina Frias, Senior Team Leader, B2B and R&D at NotCo, Paul Leschavelle, VP Global R&D at Barry Callebaut, and Professor Suzanne Mischer, Professor and Head Research Group Food Biology at Zurich University of Applied Sciences. I will do my best to weave your questions into our conversation as they come up, so please do poke them in the Q&A. I know my limitations and my skill set, so I won't be following the chat. So just put them in the Q&A if you want me to see them, and I'll do my best. With that, we do have a lot to cover in today's session, but I want to start really at this high level by describing the current landscape and why innovation is essential. Paul, I'd love if you could start our conversation by describing from an industry-wide perspective, what do you see as the greatest threats to the chocolate supply today, and how do those differ potentially across geographies?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for inviting me to join the webinar. Indeed, we have been used, we were used to see year after year the production of cocoa growing steadily. Of course, there were some years better than the other, but it was growing. And the last 2 years, we saw specifically an impact on the crops, specifically in West Africa. And this was, I think, a wake up for the industry. And this comes from a situation where we had the impact of weather change, meaning rainfall change with some extreme situation of heavy rains or a dry period, which translate into disease. Of course, without going too technical, we have a black pod, but we have also swollen shoots. So these diseases are affecting mostly the West African crop and cocoa plantation, which is also aging. These plantations were set up 20, 30 years before, and this is aging. So we have the situation on the change of weather, aging plantation, impact of disease. At the same time, it's a dynamic situation. We have new plantation coming in other regions, and maybe it's good to mention Ecuador. Ecuador, it's quite growing in Latin America, but this is not offsetting the impact of the West Africa. So all in all, I think this has an impact, drop in production, less cocoa from West Africa, and subsequent the impact on the price that all the industry faced recently. So I think that's a little bit on the overview on the situation now, on the supply on cocoa that we are also watching very carefully from our Barry Callebaut. We are factories and observation placed in different countries, but definitively impact in West Africa. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Suzanne, I'm hoping you can build on that a little bit from the farm and fermentation level. What are some of the threats that you see to the quality of bean production post-harvest, and how are those impacting the consumer experience, taste, texture, etc.?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. So first of all, as well, thank you from my side for inviting me today to be a speaker in this webinar and to explain a little bit from the farmers and also fermentation side. So to be asked about the major threats, I think one of the major threats is the high variability of spontaneous fermentation during post-harvesting, which is still the standard in cocoa producing regions. So since fermentation relies on microorganisms, those little helpers from the environment, and is influenced by many other parameters such as the weather conditions, climate, raw materials, or even the fermentation devices, many others, so the outcomes might be unpredictable. So a specific challenge we studied with my research team is the growth of filamentous fungi during post-harvesting and also later during storage of the beans. So these fungi can reduce bean quality by creating those typical musty or earthy off flavors, but they also pose a food safety risk through potential mycotoxin production. So if these problems occur, the beans lose both the flavor potential, but also their market value. This shows how critical it is to stabilize the post-harvest process so that farmers and industry can consistently achieve high-quality beans with desirable chocolate notes.
thank you. And I'm excited to talk more about some of your research and findings as we go along. But I want to continue to be a negative Nelly here for a few minutes and talk a little bit more about the challenges. Paul, I want to take it back to you, right? I'm curious, as we explore the challenges, how do you see consumer expectations evolving alongside these challenges? Or are they? I mean, to what extent do consumers understand or forgive changes in taste or texture or supply and price of chocolate?
Yeah, of course, there is a price impact. The cocoa price has gone up dramatically, and this translates on the shelf for the consumer. I believe the consumer doesn't change in his expectation in terms of taste. We call it for us a chocolate experience. So the consumer is always looking at a chocolate experience. And when you eat a chocolate bar, a muffin, a brownie, an ice cream, you need still to have this mouthfeel experience with the chocolate, this coconut, or so this remain. And I think, yes, there is a price increase, but the expectation of the consumer remains the same. So product with a certain quality in terms of texture, in terms of mouthfeel, in terms of characteristic. You see in many applications, but at the end, it remains. The perception, it's a product which brings a certain emotion with the consumer, and this remains. The people buy chocolate to relax or to have some good time at the end of the day. So that remains, and the expectation remains the same in terms of sensory and the mouthfeel. So for us, I think it's, yes, we have this price impact, and we need to see how we can manage the price, find the solution which enable to mitigate it towards the consumer. But the expectation from the consumer is still that to deliver a product which meet his or her expectation in terms of sensory.
Great. And I know we will talk more about the consumer as we go along and sort of managing expectations and encouraging adoption and trial of new formats. I'm curious, Marina, from your AI and formulation lens, right? How are supply disruptions and changing in consumer expectations, or not changing consumer expectations, pushing companies to rethink chocolate?
Yeah, so nowadays R&D teams are facing unprecedented complexity in terms that they need to meet the consumer expectations while still dealing with this supply chain interruptions, the regulatory pressures, and the shifting consumers' preferences. So as Paul was saying, when we speak about chocolate, we are all speaking in the same language, right? We know the ingredients, we know what to expect in terms of the taste, in terms of the texture. So what happens when one or more of these pieces fall out of balance? And that's where AI comes in to help us rethink about a product that we've been consuming and we've been making for thousands of years, and even to redefine it. And I don't see this as a defensive move. I think this is an opportunity. So when parts of a traditional formula are under pressure, and this could be the sugar, this could be the cocoa, this could be the fat, I think that we are working with a blank canvas. So it's a chance to challenge what we know, to explore different ingredients, to explore different ingredient synergies, and to even see how far we can push the boundaries of what chocolate actually is.
Fantastic, thank you. And I am excited to talk sort of about some of these new boundaries and new paths forward for the industry, right? And so if we're going to explore solutions, let's take a look at some of those, right? I want to first look at how industry stakeholders can optimize the current cocoa supply, right? So what are some of the paths forward for improving supply chain and improving disease management, et cetera? Stan, let's start with you this time, because much of the work that you are doing is actually in the field or immediately post-harvest. Share with us some of the work that you're doing around fermentation innovation, microbial cultures to improve yield, flavor, food safety. You mentioned your fungi challenge earlier, so you can talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yes, so I'm happy to do so. So my team or our teams in Wädenswil at Zurich University of Applied Sciences, so we focus on the developing of microbial starter cultures for cocoa post-harvesting, aiming at bringing safety and consistency to cocoa fermentation. So one example is we tested protective lactic acid bacteria and yeast co-cultures that actively inhibit filamentous fungi while supporting the spontaneous fermentation process. So if you just added those cultures on top to the spontaneous fermentation process. And more recently, we identified a novel yeast, Vicker Hamomyces piperi, with strong pectinolytic activity. So this yeast helps to break down the pulp more efficiently, which improves aeration and speeds up the fermentation dynamics. That's really interesting also for the farmers. So these cultures, these microbial cultures, not only reduce health risks, so by, for example, inhibiting the filamentous fungi that might produce mycotoxins, but at the same time, they allow us to modulate the flavor. So you have both, you have the food safety aspect and also the flavor aspect. So for example, those cultures are able to lower astringency or enhance specific cocoa notes, fruity notes, and so on. So in short, we try to turn a highly variable natural process into one that is safer, more predictable, and better aligned with the flavor expectations of chocolate makers.
Great, thank you. I want to stick with you for another minute because I'm curious what you're hearing from farmers and their willingness to engage or not with some of these potential solutions in the field and at the fermentation level.
That's a really important question, Elizabeth, because I always love to say we can do whatever in our labs. Finally, it has to be accepted and applied in this field in the countries of origin. So from farmers, so we work with many farmers in many countries of origin, mainly in Latin America so far. So from those farmers, we hear both, on the one side, curiosity, but also caution. They are sometimes quite interested in solutions that can increase the bean quality and therefore their income, but they're also cautious about the complexity and costs that might arise. So many innovations are only successful if they integrate into daily routines with minimal disruption. So that's why we test our approaches directly on the farms together with the farmers. For example, we tried to adapt our cultures to the production process of the cultures so they can be applied easily, regardless of whether the fermentation happens in heaps or in boxes or in bags, so whatever fermentation device is used. So when the farmers finally see concrete benefits, like, for example, fewer losses, shorter fermentation times, or better flavors that results in premiums, so then their willingness to adopt new methods rises significantly. So this is what we really observed, and that we think it's really important to notice.
Paul, you also have a background as an agronom. I can't say this word. Try it.
Agronomist. Yeah.
Thank you. Where do you see opportunities to optimize today's cocoa supply, and what are some of the economic or continuing with cultural conversation or technical barriers that you see to adopting some of these innovations at scale, especially in producing countries?
Yeah, indeed. I spent, when I start working, a couple of years in cocoa producing country in cocoa research. So, and we need a cocoa farm, a cocoa farmer to really bring up the production. So the first part, I think, is on the existing plantation, and here I think mostly in West Africa, is how we can increase the yield of the plantation. So this can be done through some program. We have some organization programs through the World Cocoa Foundation. You have the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, which is about supporting the industry in terms of avoiding deforestation. We have also at Barry Callebaut a program which is called the Forever Chocolate. We also deliver some seedlings and some shade trees seedlings to the farmer. And this program also includes some training to help the farm for different activities in the different places. So with that, you increase the yield of the plantation, and we avoid a further degradation. So that's one aspect, and it's focusing on the smallholder. The second aspect is in this new producing country. I mentioned Ecuador, mentioned Brazil, is how we can also in this place where you have more industrial plantation to also have some additional production from this place. It will not be one instead of the other. I think the model needs the two to balance the challenge that we have in West Africa with the new production of this market or these countries in Latin America. So that's two initiatives: revigorating the existing plantation, or new seedlings and new plantation in other places.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing your Forever Chocolate program details. That sounds really interesting. Marina, I'm curious to hear from you as well, right? How can AI tools help companies and suppliers optimize the current cocoa supply usage? Maybe it's reducing reliance on volatile inputs in the short term. What are you seeing on that front?
So AI is helping us create solutions that can either extend or even replace the cocoa by using alternative ingredients and still protecting what the consumers would expect in a chocolate. So the power of AI here isn't just about finding and getting access to those ingredients. It's about understanding how we can combine them efficiently and how you can do it across taste, texture, cost, nutritional guidelines, and regulatory. So in a way, it's how you can optimize simultaneously all of these variables and getting the best product that you can. So in a way, this means less trial and error, faster reformulation, and then it frees up a lot of the time from the developer for deeper creativity and also for scientific research.
I think you bring up a really good point. I know at IFT's first summit this last summer, extending the cocoa supply was a big topic, right? So what are some solutions for enhancing the flavor so you need less, or bulking it so you need less? Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm sort of curious what you're seeing on this front, sort of around extension and replacement of the current supply.
Yeah, so sorry, can you repeat the question because the line was broken, Elizabeth? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. I'm curious sort of how Barry Callebaut is thinking about extension, right? So what are some of the ways that you're stretching the cocoa supply that we have? Where do you see those applications working best, and where do you see them not really meeting expectations?
Yeah, you speak about cocoa alternative or speaking pure cocoa ingredient or both? Yeah.
Yeah, so sort of curious. I was saying at IFT first this summer, there was a lot of technologies and advancements and other ingredients coming into play to extend actual cocoa, right? So that you need less of it. But I'm curious how effective that is and if it differs for applications.
No, it's so first I repeat, at the end it's a chocolate experience. So we cannot have compromise in terms of the taste. The consumer are expecting a certain profile. Then, yes, there are new ingredients or existing ingredients, and a lot of work is to understand how we can leverage these ingredients through the process, through the technology, which is known in cocoa, to get a taste which is quite comparable to chocolate. I think there are some, of course, it's a lot of work, but in several cases and in some application, we are quite close. If you go in a pure, because not forget that the chocolate go in application, meaning that it's not necessarily used pure, but sometimes in combination with biscuits, with ice cream, with wafer, and so on. So depending on the application, the level of potential use is different. And if you go to the pure, really premium chocolate, then indeed it's much more challenging. If you go in some mixed application, then you have some opportunity to leverage all these new ingredients and to deliver still the same chocolate experience. So it's a lot of work from our side and our team, looking at on what side, what the customer want, what the consumer demand, what is the application, then what is the technology behind, and the type of process and roasting or mixing that we use, and the different raw material specificity. And leveraging whenever possible some models to make it happen, as also suggested by Marina. So I think it's a combination of all of this, and it's a lot of interaction end to end from one side on the different ingredient up to the application and how it is consumed by the end user. I don't know if I answer the question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. It's always interesting to hear sometimes how these things are playing out in the real world. I think I do have sort of one more question here in this space, and we touched on it a little bit, right? But I want to talk a little bit more about the tradition behind chocolate, right? That's a big part of it, the tradition of how it's made, how it's consumed. And I'm curious, how can stakeholders protect that tradition, that cultural touchstone, while also introducing some of these needed changes or modern science to reinforce the supply chain? I guess another way that would be like, how can you avoid innovations that improve efficiency, but compromise on the cultural heritage at origin? And I'm not really sure who wants to chime in here on this one first.
If I may, there are some regulations, so you cannot do whatever you want. And so there are some definition of the ingredient, of the products. There are also some food safety requirements, so that's also very important. So meaning there is a frame which is behind, but to make sure there is it's aligned with what people call chocolate. So that's something which is behind, and there are also rules and regulation in the producing country of what is a cocoa beans or cocoa. So all this is clearly defined. So meaning we have some, and that I think protects the overall market and avoid that there is some confusion of what people do. So just some feedback from my side.
Yeah, to add on that, I think it's about framing innovation as a way to preserve the chocolate experience and not just to replace it.
Suzanne, any thoughts from you sort of around balancing the future of chocolate, like modern technology, but also what's happening on the field and how farmers are engaging in the space? And you might be muted.
Sorry, I didn't saw that I was still muted. So my thoughts really went into this direction. So to like preserve traditions or the traditional processes and the work with the farmers, but at the same time, we have to be open for new innovations, also with respect to new ingredients or new ways to produce raw material for finally producing chocolate alternatives. So it has to be like a balance of tradition and innovation. And innovation can also support tradition. For example, as I explained just aforehead, what we are doing together with the farmers in the countries of origin.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for that. So talking about strengthening cocoa as it's grown and processed today is one part of it, but innovation isn't stopping there, right? There are a whole lot of new ways of making or even replacing chocolate that are emerging. So I want to turn our attention now to some of those breakthrough technologies. Marina, let's start with you, right? I'm eager to hear about how NotCo's unique AI solutions can help extend or replace cocoa in some applications. But before we dig into that, I want to start at the very basic level because I don't know that everyone is familiar with NotCo's Giuseppe. So tell us a little bit about what Giuseppe is, and a bit about your Discovery and Elevate platforms.
Yeah, of course. So Giuseppe is our AI product development platform that enables speed and accuracy across the product lifecycle. So think of it as three different parts. On one side, we have concept quant. So concept quant, what it does is generates new ideas, disruptive ideas and concepts. Then you have discovery that has all of the resources. So ingredients, formula, open source, scientific literature, regulatory guidelines, nutritional, cost information. So then we have Elevate, that will be like our last platform. And Elevate, what it does, helps us solve really complex R&D challenges by optimizing multiple variables at the same time. And here, think about meeting the right analytic targets, the sensory, a specific target cost, the nutritionals. So you are able to optimize towards all of that in just one experiment. I hope this wasn't that too complex, but I think just to put it in simpler words, Giuseppe helps you come up with an idea. Then it gives you the resources to actually execute it. And then it fines tune it so that it meets your standard until it's ready to launch to the market. And of course, we know that here we will do some type of like sensory validation, right? A QDA, SDLT, depending on what is your process to launch something to the market. In order on how we are using this for cocoa replacement, I think I can give an example of a generic project. I'm due to confidentiality reasons, I cannot really share specific details. But I can share about how we would think about it and what the process would be. So the first thing here is to always set a clear target. And let's say that it's a product that has a 60% reduction in the cocoa. So this is something that we define with our client. And the other important thing is we need to define which are the trade-offs, right? Which are the non-negotiables in my brief. And that could be, I need that the target cost is exactly the price of cocoa 2 years ago. That would be an example. Or maybe it's about availability, or maybe it's about nutritional. So it can be so many things. Then what we can do is we digitize that target. So we run a series of analytical measurements of that. So we characterize it. And then all of that goes into discovery. So Giuseppe will start scanning and screening different ingredients and it will recommend them. So once you have kind of like a skeleton, it will not even need to be a formula, but with which ingredients you want to start is that you start optimizing towards them. So you have your brief, you know what's your target cost, you know which regulatory guidelines you need to meet, you know which analytical measurements are critical for that development. You can even include the processing here, and I think that's part of the beauty of this tool. Like you are able to formulate and to like fine-tune percentages and also process parameters at the same time, and that's really disruptive to the traditional way of doing things. So we put all of this into what we call Elevate. Elevate will create random formulations. We will run all of those formulas at bench, so in our labs. Then we will run sensory and we will run also analytics on those prototypes, and we will give feedback to the tool. So with that feedback, Giuseppe starts learning, and it will create a series of other, let's say, 5 formulations. And this is where the iteration process starts. And you will see how you start getting closer and closer to the objectives that you set up at the beginning of the project. And I think something that is really important here is make sure that you are not restricting the experiment where you don't have to, right? Or where you don't really have a necessity, just because you are also constraining the exploration space. And what you want is something that is completely outside of the box, or maybe not, right? It depends on the client. It depends on what they have. It depends on probably their scale, if we're talking about a big company or a small company. So yeah, I mean, you iterate and then you will get to the best formulation that you can possibly have with those ingredients. And then just to add up one more thing that I think it's really interesting is that Giuseppe, what it does is also helps to build some sort of like map or network on how those ingredients are interacting, not only between each other, but within the whole system. So it gives you a deeper understanding of how like ingredient A interacts with B and also has an impact in this analytical measurement. And maybe that's something that as a developer, you would never think of because you know exactly what ingredients will affect what. And then once you start developing, you find yourself in a position where you realize that there was something there changing that wasn't supposed to change. So it's also great for those kind of insights.
Thank you for sharing some details on how you all are approaching it. Well, I haven't tried any of your chocolate solutions. I have tried some of your other solutions and are plant-based, and it's pretty startling how well you match the taste and texture with very unexpected ingredient combinations. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. Other novel solutions out there. Suzanne, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see synthetic biology and precision fermentation fitting into the future of the cocoa ecosystem. You know, to what extent is it complementary and to what extent is it competitive?
Yeah, so if you mention precision fermentation and synthetic biology, so to start with the precision fermentation, there are many definitions for this field. So in general, if we are talking of precision fermentation, it is a tool to produce single molecules by the help of a specific microorganism in a fermenter. Either the microorganism is natural or it is a GMO. On the other side, we have the synthetic biology, so meaning the combination of, for example, engineering and biology up to the production of plant cells in a bioreactor. So for both fields, we have the biotechnological aspect. So I see both the synthetic biology and also the precision fermentation as complementary rather than purely competitive. So I think these technologies can help us to produce, for example, specific cocoa flavor molecules or even fat fractions in a bioreactor, or as indicated, the cocoa cells, the plant cells themselves in controlled ways, which may be valuable in times of climate stress or when supply is unstable. So at the same time, those methods, precision fermentation, synthetic biology, cannot fully, in my opinion, cannot fully reproduce the complexity and cultural heritage of cocoa production and fermentation on farms. So everything that is going on in the countries of origin and that is the work of the farmers. So I believe the future ecosystem will be, perhaps like hybrid. Cocoa farming will remain the backbone, while precision fermentation or synthetic biology can support filling the gaps, enhancing sustainability, and even opening new product categories. Yeah.
Great, thank you. There is a lot of potential. As you mentioned, there's also some constraints and limitations at where we are today. And Paul, I am curious from your perspective as an established player, if you could talk a little bit about some of those constraints, right? You touched on a little bit earlier, but what hurdles do you see in terms of regulatory or scale up or consumer trust, right? And how is that hindering innovations in the market or adoption of some of the technologies that are out there now?
Continue on what Susan explained and takes the example of cocoa cell culture, because that's a concrete example and fully aligned with what Susan was saying on the complementary of the two approach. So I take this example because at Barry Callebaut, yes, we have a tradition and we have our mainstream on cocoa from farm, and but we are also exploring new technology, and we are startup program, and this is official with at Harvard University on cocoa cell culture, because we want to understand also what is the potential of this cell culture to develop specific aroma, specific flavor, and how we could potentially use them in a product. So coming to your question, I think, yes, there is regulation, but it's not to hinder us, it's to guide us and to make sure that we deliver at the end a product which is safe for the consumer. So it's, of course, the basic is we need to respect food safety to make sure the products are done in a proper way. And then we need to go to a certain process without being too technical. You have a novel food approval in Europe, you have a GRAS approval in North America. This takes time, but we need to respect this to make sure that the products are properly evaluated and then go to the consumer in a safe way. So this, we follow all this. I think this is quite regulated. It's true, this takes time, but I think at the same time, this new ingredient, this really emerging technology, so it's not something we can launch in 3 to 6 months. We need a couple of years to make it happen. So we need to manage in parallel the development of the product, the research, the biology, with a research institute like Zurich University, and the regulatory approval to make sure that we bring to the market something which is in line with the consumer expectation, and at the end we'll have the potential to grow. So we have the combination of the two. There are some rules, and we need to follow and take the necessary time to bring the product to the market.
Fantastic, thank you. I do have one more question right here, and again, whoever wants to answer it can. But I want to do a little bit of a gut check, right? To what extent are these novel approaches stopgaps until the cocoa supply stabilizes, or are they really permanent paths forward for the industry?
If I may, I think it's two. Of course, yeah, you will mitigate the risk, but say cocoa will remain cocoa, so we mitigate the risk. But at the same time, I think I'm quite optimistic. We can also develop new flavor profile, maybe some aroma, some molecule which are present in some of these products, which enable to enlarge the scope of the product we can offer to the consumer. And then you bring even more attraction to some consumer who are not eating chocolate. So I think it's also an opportunity to expand the range of product which consumer will eat.
I see Suzanne nodding her head. Do you want to add anything?
No, I just really fully agree with Paul. So also from my side, I see all these approaches not as like stopgaps, but just as a permanent tool to strengthen their resilience. Wow.
Maria, anything to add on your end?
I fully agree with that. I also think that now we are talking about cocoa, right? But with a word that is like changing so much with climate change, with so many things happening, I think right now we are talking about a solution for cocoa, but like I honestly think that in a couple of years going to be another ingredient, the one that is going to be that the supply is going to be threatened. So I think that all of these approaches are here to stay for sure. And in a way, we need to learn from them so that we can react and we can adapt faster to the time where all of this or where any of other ingredient is supply chain is being threatened.
I think that's a really good point, right? Today we're talking about the chocolate industry, but this is not a unique challenge to this space. Supply chains across many commodity crops and specialty crops are being threatened and come in and out of season. So I think you raise a really good point there that other industries can look to each other for solutions when their time inevitably comes, which sounds terrible. So there clearly are a lot of innovative approaches to challenges facing chocolate, but for them to succeed, as we heard already, ultimately consumers do need to embrace or at least accept them. So the next question I have is, how do we bring people along to make sure that these products deliver a chocolate experience that they will love and that they'll not only just try out of novelty, but over and over again? And so Paul, maybe you can start us off, right? To what extent do you see consumers caring about how their chocolate is made as long as it tastes like chocolate? Or does the provenance and the clean label movement and the processing really matter to chocolate consumers?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And internally, we have this. So if you look at a chocolate recipe, and without going into detail, but you can say from a technical point of view, this is done with a roasting with this specific process, or with this temperature, or with this conching or whatever. So this is really the technical information. Or you can do the same with other ingredients. But this doesn't resonate to the consumer. To our view, there are two things which resonate. One is the sensory, the way you describe. So if you describe, I'm eating a dark chocolate with a little bit of red fruit or a yellow fruit, or with a nice melting profile, and when the consumer, and again with the chocolate experience, you feel this sensory balance, and keep it. So that I think resonates. So taste and emotion linked to taste is key. The second one is the link with the farmer, with the origin, linked to the sustainability, the traceability. So the fact that when you eat something, you can rely, and it can be cocoa, but it can be other ingredient, and you can link it to to the people who have produced it. I think that's very important. So for me, I think these are the two key elements. The process, yes, there needs to be behind, like the engine in a car, if I can say, this is something we need to master and make sure it's done in a consistent, safe way. But I believe for the consumer is more important the emotion of the product and the connection with origins. I think that's the two key parts.
Great, thank you. I think one of the other kind of cool things that's happening in this space as we look at different ways to create chocolate products is that there's an opportunity to also meet consumer demand or interest in functional benefits. And so, Marina, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about health-focused claims and the potential to create better for you chocolate with less sugar or more protein or other functional benefits. How do you see those intersecting with preserving the indulgent chocolate experience and also opening up potential new markets?
So I think that reformulating for health is a really delicate balance, even like an art, right? Because, for example, sugar isn't just about the sweetness, especially in a complex matrix like it's a chocolate. So we are also thinking about, or we're also seeing how it affects the texture, the structure of the chocolate, the mouthfeel. So the challenge here is to be able to reduce the sugar, the fat, um, the calories, or even like increasing the high protein while maintaining the sensory experience of the chocolate. So without impacting the particle size, without impacting like the mouthfeel, or how we are expecting a chocolate to actually be. So here's where AI is also playing a really important role, that is being able to optimize across all of these competing variables, right? So it's not that you need to focus only on the flavor, you can do flavor and texture at the same time. And I think this is key to find where, like, that sweet spot where indulgent is actually meeting health. Um, so I would say it's a really complicated and really complex process, but I think it can be done. Again, the non-negotiables, that is something that is that we need to have clear, right? So, for example, the cost.
Great, thank you. I still have more questions, but I do want to flag for attendees that if you all have questions, please do go ahead and drop them in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to carve out some space here before we end. Suzanne, I want to pull you in, right? So one of the things that we heard you mentioned earlier, and Paul also mentioned earlier, is this balance of tradition and the importance of provenance. How does the industry preserve the soul of chocolate while also adopting these modern processes and ingredients?
Yeah, that's not muted. So this is as well a very good questions, and I dare to say, so how will we support the industry so to preserve the soul of chocolate? So the soul of chocolate is rooted in the cacao fruit. So to the people who cultivate it and the traditional fermentation, the traditional processes that gives rise to its complexity. So the modern processes and ingredients should not just replace this, but rather help protect and enhance it. So preserving the soul, in my opinion, means keeping the authentic link to farming communities while using innovation to improve safety, consistency, and also sustainability. So for example, the example of our microbial cultures or the optimized post-harvest processes don't take away from the essence of cocoa. So they help us to highlight its natural flavor potential and ensure that consumers still experience the richness and diversity of chocolate. In other words, innovation should amplify cocoa's identity and not dilute it. So I dare to repeat my former statement. I believe in this hybrid ecosystem where cocoa farming will remain the backbone, while new technologies and new ingredients will support this by filling the gaps.
I think it's interesting with this hybrid approach that you're mentioning, that it seems sort of a logical way forward. But I am curious, if we're talking about consumer acceptance, how do we bring them along, especially in today's environment when science and food are not always seen in a positive light next to each other? Paul, I'm curious, sort of from your perspective, what role does storytelling have? So either talking about farm origin or tech innovation, how does that play into winning over consumer trust? And how much science is too much, and how much is needed for sufficient transparency?
Yeah, I think reflecting on what was explaining, yes, there is a science behind. I think for many products, the 2 points I was mentioning are very key. The emotion of the product and when the consumer eat it, and the link with the origin country and with the producer. There is one area where science is important, and going back to the point Marina was mentioning, is we should not forget that cocoa is also very has a lot of benefit for health, and there are also in the cocoa beans many specific components, flavanol, anthocyanin, and theobromine. And here, when we speak about health benefit, it's important we mention the science. So I think in this area, yes, the science is very important because it resonates in the ears of the consumer. This is what they want. For the chocolate, which is more used for emotion, I would say the science is what is inside, but is more like the engine of the manufacturer. What is important is the sensory plus the link of the link with the producing country. So this connection with the origin. So science is important for me when we look at health, and this is a trend. I think we see more and more cocoa with the health benefit. In this case, yes, it's important to communicate.
So it sounds like a hybrid approach is also
indeed.
important on this front.
Yeah.
We are sort of coming up close to the hour, but I want to squeeze in one question from our attendees Jose asks, do you foresee space for non-cocoa products such as carob-based or sunflower-based? And how might that fit into this conversation? I'm not sure who's best positioned for
If
that
I may,
response.
this exists already in the market. Carob is already known for many, many years because a couple of years ago, there was also some high cocoa price, and the carob is known for color close to cocoa. Taste is different, but so it's already known. Sunflower, fava, there are other ingredients. I think there are already some products in the market in some countries. So it's not, of course, mainstream, but I think there are some products which are already there.
Great, thank you. According to my clock, we have 3 minutes left, which is exactly enough time for each of you to have 1 minute to tell us a little bit about your visions for the future of this category, and maybe share a call to action for listeners. How can they help create a world where there's sufficient chocolate to satisfy consumers while still supporting the livelihoods of farmers and satisfying regulators? Susan, do you want to kick us off?
So I'm happy to do so. So my vision is a cocoa sector where science, tradition, so with tradition meaning the farmers in the producing countries, and industry work hand in hand to ensure stable quality, secure farmers' livelihoods, and also a truly sustainable future for chocolate. So even less than 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you for being concise. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's sorry, sorry. Yeah, it's really support the farmer because we need cocoa farmers and help them to grow again and bring more cocoa. And I think this is one. At the same time, for me, this is a whole triangle. At the same time, understand and develop further taste and sensory experience with the consumer, is a chocolate experience. And 3 is to be, I'm more speaking as R&D, agile and curious about new innovation to support the growth, either on the origin and or with the consumer. So I see the three together and the role of R&D in between to be curious of new things, and now we can bridge on one side the farmer, on the other side the consumer.
Yeah, to add on that, I think that my vision is also that AI will help us reimagine chocolate as a category. So maintaining its indulgence, but while making it more resilient, more ethical, and more sustainable.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And with that, we have come. It's hard to imagine. We're to the end of our time together, but I do want to thank our panelists for your insights about the next wave of chocolate innovation, where the industry is heading, some strategies for balancing a lot of different priorities. I also want to thank everyone for joining us on this call, and of course, our hosts for bringing us all together. Lauren, back to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for moderating today's discussion, and to our expert panelists, Marina, Suzanne, and Paul, for sharing your insights. We're also super grateful to our partners at Business Location Switzerland for making this series possible. So today's session is part of our Cocoa Futures webinar series, where we'll be exploring the forces shaping chocolate's next era, from sustainability and sourcing to breakthrough technologies and new consumer experiences. So we encourage you to join us for our upcoming sessions happening in 2 weeks, and then another 2 weeks after that. You can learn more about all of that on the Eventbrite that you registered for this session through, and hopefully you also registered for those later sessions. But if you'd like to learn more about Branch Food, our work with innovators and investors across the food industry, or Business Location Switzerland, please reach out to me. Please reach out to them. I can be reached at lauren@branchfood.com. They can be reached at businesslocation.swiss to explore opportunities in Switzerland's thriving food and ag tech ecosystem. So finally, a quick reminder, today's webinar contained proprietary information and confidential business information. Any references, quotes, or publications based on the content must be approved prior to distribution, and please contact us, the webinar organizers, to affirm that. So thank you all again for joining us. We look forward to continuing the conversation and seeing you all at our next Cocoa Futures session in 2 weeks on October 15th, and have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.